Joining us right now to talk about this is Democratic Senator Jean Shaheen of New Hampshire. She's the top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thank you for your time. A ton to get to with you. Let's start with exactly what John and Clarissa were just talking about. Do you support this blockade as you understand it, that is going to set in now about an hour, allegedly, against shipping to and from Iranian ports?
Well, I think the goal is to put economic pressure on Iran to get them back to the table. The talks over the weekend were historic, the first time that the U.S. and Iran has really had face-to-face negotiations since the Iranian hostage crisis back in the 70s. So hopefully we can't expect that as far apart as the U.S. and Iran are, that they're going to come to some agreement in one sitting. So hopefully this means that we will be able to go back to the table, that the U.S. will continue to negotiate, and that Iran will feel that economic pressure and be willing to come back to the table as well.
Are you hopeful that a blockade, as it's been described, will be the thing that forces Iran back to the table?
Well, I think there are a whole series of things that hopefully will bring the parties together to the table. The blockade has been defined a little differently by the president and by Admiral Cooper at CENTCOM as being a blockade of Iran's traffic to and from Iranian ports, which is the effort to really ramp up economic pressure on Iran. I think that is a more doable option and hopefully will provide some positive progress in negotiations than the idea that we would blockade everything going through the Strait of Hormuz.
With regard to the war in Iran, President Trump is now picking a fight with, I guess you could say, what he apparently views as a new opponent today, which is the Pope. President attacked Pope Leo overnight as his quote was weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy. This morning, Pope Leo is responding. Let me play this.
I have no fear of neither the Trump administration nor speaking out loudly about the message of the gospel. And that's what I believe. I am called to do what the church is called to do. We're not politicians. We're not looking to make foreign policies with the same perspective that we might understand it. But I do believe in the message of the gospel. Blessed are the peacemakers. It's the message of the Lord needs to hear.
What do you think of what we are now seeing play out in extraordinary fashion here?
Well, the Pope responds to a higher authority than Donald Trump. And one of my lessons early on when I got involved in politics was to never take on the Catholic Church on an issue like this. So I don't think this is good news for President Trump. I think the Pope has the moral authority, not only in the United States, but around the world. And I think Donald Trump trying to undercut the Pope makes no sense at all.
Fellow Democrat, he's in the House, Eric Swalwell. He's facing allegations right now of sexual misconduct and assault. Senator, allegations he denies. He just dropped his bid for governor of California overnight over this. He's now facing calls to resign his House seat. You are a leader in your party, and you've seen quite a lot from your colleagues in the many years that you've served. Do you think that he should resign from Congress or face expulsion?
Well, I certainly think, given the people who have come forward, his former staffers, and raised these allegations, that they must be investigated and if found true. And I think we need to give the victims the benefit of the doubt. If found true, then he should resign.
Some of your colleagues, there's a growing number who are not waiting to see an investigation take place. They think in light of what has been already alleged that they would like to see him resign in face of it. You are not there yet.
Well, I think he needs to answer to his constituents and to his colleagues. But I do think, as I said, we need to listen when victims come forward who have been sexually assaulted or raped. I think victims who allege inappropriate behavior need to be listened to. And it needs to be done in a way that provides for a real investigation and real consequences if found guilty.